The Collins family always appeared to the neighbours like a picture-perfect ad for the American dream. A suburban house with a white picket fence, a neatly trimmed lawn, and 3 smiling faces in the holiday photo Richard, the father Helen, the mother and Emily, the radiant little daughter. I was in that photo too. But if you looked closely, I was always slightly off to the side, as if added in just to make up the numbers. No one told me to step back, but instinct had already whispered that my place was never at the centre. On Emily's 10th birthday, our parents took her to the big toy store downtown. Emily picked out a premium doll, its hair silky like strands of gold, complete with a tiny suitcase of clothes. I stood beside her, watching the sparkle in her eyes, and our mother's hand resting gently on her shoulder. When we got home, Richard called me out to the garage and handed me an old doll he'd bought at a flea market. Its right leg was broken at the knee, patched up with clear tape. "Just be careful not to twist it too hard," he said in a flat tone. I hugged it, smoothing out its tangled hair. In that evening's photo, Emily sat in the centre of the sofa, cradling her new doll, while I curled up at the edge of the frame, one hand gripping the doll's cracked leg to keep it from falling off. When I was little, I would sit at the corner of the dining table, where the light didn't shine directly. Helen would serve Emily the best portions, and Richard would talk about his work to the whole family. When their eyes drifted to me, it was only to remind sit up straight, eat neatly, don't spill the sauce. But there was another day, a rare one when I thought I was truly seen. The school was holding an art fair. I was in 2nd grade and had submitted a drawing of a wooden bridge crossing the stream behind the sports field. I stood frozen before the results board, seeing my name at the very top. My parents came to the award ceremony. Helen placed her hand on my shoulder, and Richard smiled, saying, "You made that bridge look real." That night, the certificate sat proudly in the middle of the dinner table, and dinner felt warmer than usual. I thought, maybe today I really belong in this family. But the next morning breakfast was just frozen waffles. Mum asked Emily about dance practice, and Dad reminded her to bring her trophy for the team photo. No one mentioned the certificate that still lay quietly on the bookshelf in my room. The warmth of the night before evaporated as quickly as steam on a bathroom mirror. Once I brought another drawing to dinner, a pencil sketch. I was 8, carefully keeping the paper flat, hoping to hear some praise. Richard glanced at it, set it down on the table, then asked in that same flat tone, "Have you ever truly thought of yourself as part of this family?" The question dropped onto the table like a stone. Helen said nothing, just sipped her wine. Emily laughed for reasons I couldn't understand. And me? I didn't know how to answer. I just nodded slightly, then quietly folded the drawing and slipped it into my pocket. That night I hid it under my pillow, thinking that if I fell asleep, maybe tomorrow things would be different. But no one brought it up again the next morning, as if the question had never been asked. Since then, I've learned not to reach out too far. I stopped showing my drawings, stopped talking about good grades, stopped hoping for compliments. I gradually became a shadow in the very house outsiders still called perfect. Sometimes I wonder, was I only added in to fill some empty space in this family portrait, a space that was never meant for me to begin with? And at 18, that empty space quietly split into 2 diverging paths. I held a letter announcing my art scholarship, along with a shift schedule for washing dishes at a late-night diner. Emily received an offer from an elite private school with the note tuition sponsored by family. Dad placed a brand new MacBook in front of her like awarding a medal, the lid opening with a soft breath. I wiped down my second-hand laptop bought cheap online, its fan wheezing like a small bird trapped in a box. Mum folded a new pastel bedding set for Emily, clipping the receipt neatly. I wrapped my clothes into a scuffed plastic suitcase, securing the worn-out zipper with my thumbnail. The night before I left home, Dad set his spoon down, looked at me as if measuring whether I was worthy, then said each word slowly, "Art doesn't feed anyone. What do you think you've done to deserve our love?" He didn't need to raise his voice. The question landed softly, sinking into the tenderest part of me like a stone. I didn't answer. Just got up to clear the dishes, trying to keep my hands from shaking. In the dorms, the bunk beds creaked, the shared bathroom smelled like cheap soap. I learned to count hours, classes in the morning, serving shifts in the afternoon, dishwashing until midnight. My roommate FaceTimed home to show off her new desk lamp. I only opened my phone to check if the transfer from work had come through. At night, walking across the bridge back toward the restaurant, the river wind slapped against my collar. I mentally tallied paint money, paper costs, bus fare, and the chunk of tuition still hanging over me. In class, the professor spoke of light composition, how to place a subject in the center of the frame so it would be seen. But I understood the opposite. If you stay at the edges, you just need to stay silent. The restaurant was full that night. The smell of steak, clinking silverware, the industrial drone of the dish machine behind the swing doors. I carried a tray of water past the row of tables by the glass wall and saw them walk in, Richard, Helen, Emily, and 2 well-dressed guests. The manager hurried over, bowing slightly. VIP table is ready. I stepped back half a pace, bumping the tray against a chair, water glasses rattling. Richard looked at me for a second, his gaze catching just briefly, then turned away as if spotting a stranger on staff. They sat at table 12, where the warm light made everything seem more expensive. I was assigned to that section. While placing the menus, Helen gave a polite smile. "Thank you, dear." Emily shut her phone, glanced at my uniform, and gave a small nod, acknowledging a server. I kept the tray steady. Tonight's special is grilled butterfish, and we've just received a new shipment of white wine I recited by heart. Richard looked up, introducing me to the guests. My daughter's studying art. Hands-on, she's working while she studies. He paused half a beat, then punctuated it with a sentence loud enough for the next table to hear. At the very least, she's starting to understand the value of labour. I placed the glass down. It tapped gently against the porcelain plate. Emily smirked, murmuring into the rim of her wineglass. She's good at this, very meticulous. The manager passed by, giving my shoulder a light pat. VIP table, watch your words. I nodded. Just as I turned to leave, Richard called out, "Wait." I stopped. He tilted his head, his voice calm like reviewing an old lesson. "Are you ever going to stop dreaming and choose something more practical?" The table next to us went quiet for half a beat. I heard the dish machine begin a new cycle. "Yes, I'll bring the wine right away," I said, then walked straight into the kitchen. The swing door hit my back. The smell of hot oil hit me in the face and my eyes stung. I set the tray down and took a deep breath. Just get through tonight. Just get through tonight. I grabbed the wine bottle and returned to table 12 as if nothing had happened. I still came home for the holidays. Same dining table, same routine. Mom served Emily, her favourite dishes. Dad talked about a colleague who had just bought a house by the lake. I tried to mention that my professor praised my latest series of drawings. Dad nodded, set his spoon down, and turned to ask Emily about her dance team's photo shoot and the ski trip his company was sponsoring. After dinner, I went upstairs to look for a forgotten sketchbook. My steps froze on the landing when I heard Dad's voice lowered just behind the half-closed door, the hum of the dishwasher swallowing parts of his words. The doctor said back then, and then to fill the gap. But then Emily came along. Mum exhaled, like setting something heavy down. Yes, and everything changed after that. I couldn't hear everything. Maybe they were talking about my sister, because I definitely heard the name Emily, but I stood there for a moment, suddenly cold from shoulders to heels. The word gap stuck in my ear like a splinter, but I told myself they could have been talking about money, scheduling, or some adult void I didn't need to step into. I almost repacked all the old memories, the doll with the broken leg, the second-grade certificate that lit up one night, then dimmed all those times I took a half step back in photos and made myself stop. Stop, overthinking. Back at the dorm, I opened the worn-out laptop logged into my shift system, letting the streetlight slide across the window like a thin ribbon. I had spent my whole life chasing a kind of love that never really existed. But the next morning, I still showed up to class on time, still wiped tables, to standard, still smiled at the regular who always asked for extra fries. In the family group chat, a Christmas message blinked like a notification light, coordinating time, place, outfit. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then turned it off. There are some holiday nights where there's no space in the centre for me, and I already know where I'll be standing in the next photo. The Collins house looked like a postcard string, lights hugging the roofliner wreath on the dark wooden door, the scent of orange peels and cinnamon drifting from the kitchen down the hallway. I arrived 10 minutes early, standing on the porch, to wipe mud off the tips of my shoes so I wouldn't dirty the carpet. Helen opened the door, brushed my cheek quickly, then turned to help a relative with a tray of cookies. The living room was already full of laughter. Emily sat in the centre of the sofa, dressed in a fitted red dress, her nails glossy and polished. Richard poured wine and raised his glass to a wonderful year. Everyone echoed him, glasses clinking softly. I placed my small gift bag under the tree, a hand-knitted scarf I'd spent a month making for Helen, and a photo book on architecture for Richard, things I could afford with my time and money. The plastic Santa on the mantel nodded to music, its bells louder than the sound of cutlery on plates. When everyone had gathered around the door, Richard said, "Before the presents, let's step outside for a moment." Cold wind slapped our faces as the door swung open. In the driveway stood a brand new silver BMW, a red ribbon tied across the hood. Helen handed Emily a small box. She opened it, a key sparkled under the porch lights. A scream burst out like fireworks. "Oh my God!" They hugged and spun in the breath-fogged air. Aunts and uncles offered congratulations all at once, phones raised, flashes popping. I stood back on the steps, hands tucked in my coat pockets for warmth. In one reflection, I saw myself in the car window, a blurred figure outside. Back inside, gifts were passed around. Emily's bag overflowed with large boxes and big bows. Mine lay nearly flat. I received a thin envelope from Helen, a $25 gift card for the cafe on the corner. Then a beige wool scarf, the discount tag still sticking out at the edge. I smiled and said thank you, folding the scarf neatly. Someone asked Emily about her road trip plans for the new year. Richard continued to talk about the car's safety system, pride in his voice. "And you, a relative, turned to me. What's your plan for the new year, Claire?" I spoke clearly without deflecting. "I'm finishing a graphite series on bridges, and the edges of frames should be done in 3 weeks. I'm submitting it to a spring group exhibition and applying to assist a weekend drawing class at the community centre. I've been saving up to rent an hourly studio space so I can skip some of the late shifts. I want to complete a series I'm proud of, not just chase trends." I paused, smiling. I know I'm slow, but I'm moving forward. A few nodded politely. One uncle said, "Sounds interesting," then turned to ask Emily about her road trip again. Richard resumed talking about the car's safety features. I poured myself more water, watching my reflection split in the oven door, half in, half out. After the family photo was done, I excused myself, saying I had an early shift. Helen said, "Drive safe," like a rehearsed line. Richard nodded, eyes tracking the car's test schedule. The wind slipped into my collar. The night fell silent as ever. Post-Christmas dinner was just the 4 of us. Old table, new tablecloth. Cold-cut salad, reheated bread. No music, only the clink of silverware on plates. I set my fork down and asked directly, why such a gap? One person gets a car, the other gets a $25 gift card. I want to understand what fairness means in this family. Helen shifted in her chair, her voice gentle. "Don't make this heavy. Gifts aren't just about price. They carry meaning too." I nodded. "Then, what's the meaning behind a $25 card I've been working 3 shifts to pay tuition?" I'm not asking for a car. I just want to be treated like someone who exists. Richard wiped the rim of his glass. Emily needs the car for work for her activities. We invest in things that bring results. You need to be practical. I looked at him. I do bring results. I earned my scholarship on my own. I pay the rest myself. When I say a professor praised my work, you change the subject. When I talk about my plans, people say, that's nice, and turn to ask Emily about hers. So let me ask, what kind of result is enough to be seen? Emily set her fork down, frowning. You always make things dramatic. It's just a car. I smiled. A car that's worth how many months of my night shifts? Helen cut in Claire. You're ruining dinner, I replied slowly. No. I'm trying to understand my family. I turned to Richard again. You said, we invest in what brings results? So, after all these years, what have I brought? Not money, I know that. But what about effort? What about respect? Have you ever seen me as anyone beyond the girl holding the plates? The kitchen fell quiet for a beat. The wall clock ticked once. Richard set his glass down, voice even like reciting a principle. You should be grateful. He paused, then threaded in one more stitch. Why is it that you always want more than what you have? The question landed in the middle of the tablecloth like something heavy, and no one picked it up. Helen turned away to stack the plates. Emily exhaled through her nose. I could hear the low hum of the heater behind the wall. I spoke softly. I just want to be respected. Is that already considered more? No one answered. I stood up to do the dishes. The hot water steamed up the window glass. With my finger, I wrote the word fairness, then wiped it away before it could fully appear. That night, as I left the house, I passed the gas station at the corner. I turned in the scratched glass counter, reflecting flickering neon lights like a rapid breath. The smell of gasoline overpowered the lingering scent of Christmas cinnamon on my scarf. "One $20 ticket, please," I said, remembering Dad's holiday habit, a lucky scratch-off to make the family laugh. The ticket slid into my hand, thin and cold like an unwritten card. The road back to my rented room was quiet. I passed a damp brick wall, my shadow stretching across the sidewalk like a shaky pencil line. In my head, the dinner argument replayed on loop. What does fairness mean in our family? We invest in things that bring results. I have results too. You should be grateful. Why do you always want more than what you have? I knew I'd spoken too fast, too directly. They're still my parents, the ones who raised me, albeit clumsily. Maybe they're just not good at kind words. Maybe I was asking for something they never learned to give. The hallway light on the 4th floor blinked on. A bit late as I reached the door. My room was small, but warm, the kettle humming the faint scent of tea bags in the air. I opened the drawer, pulled out a blank Christmas card, and wrote in round letters, I hope the new year brings you ease, Dad. I still believe in your luck like always. I placed the scratch-off ticket in the middle of the card, then paused. A silly thought popped into my head. What if it's a dud? Embarrassing he'd still smile, but I'd feel guilty. I dug in my pocket for a coin, scratched a tiny corner. Silver dust sprinkled onto the wooden desk. My heart sped up. The number revealed a bonus match. I scratched a little more, my hand shaky, the line uneven. I pulled out a chair and sat down, scratched the whole first row, then the second. I looked up because the room had suddenly gone completely silent, as if someone had unplugged all sound. I set the coin down and looked again. Not a mistake. Not a prank. $5 million, I said it out loud, too loudly, then covered my mouth with my hand. I was holding a winning ticket. I tried breaking it down to see how heavy it felt. By dishwashing wages, it was over 300,000 hours. At the sink, decades of grease clinging to hair even under a headscarf. I whispered, "No way," 2 or 3 times, then laughed, then fell silent again. The water on the stove boiled over and shut off. I opened my old laptop, the internal fan wheezing like a caged bird, pulled up the verification page, read and reread the terms, the claim deadlines, the ID requirements. Each line grew clearer, like someone was turning up the brightness on the screen. I placed my hand on the edge of the desk. It was real. It was here. And it was waiting for me to decide. The image in my mind split into 2 frames. One was tomorrow's fridge, leftovers lunch, Dad, Mom, Emily, warm, kitchen, fresh tablecloth. I would bring out the card, say, I was sorry for last night. Say I wanted us to scratch it together, like we always did, say that if there was luck, then it was luck for all of us. I saw Dad laughing over his DIY system, saw Mom cut the ribbon with composed grace, saw Emily tilt her head to capture the moment. The winnings would go toward paying off the rest of the mortgage, fixing the drafty roof, helping Mum ease up on saving for Emily's wedding fund. As for me, I'd only need enough to cover tuition, cut back on night shifts, rent a studio corner, by the hour sign up for advanced classes. I saw myself telling Dad I want to contribute to the family in my own way. I saw him nod, his hand resting on my shoulder for a beat longer than usual. The other frame was me keeping the ticket to myself, clearing my tuition, replacing the dying laptop, buying a few quality graphite sets, enrolling in a few courses, easing off the midnight table wiping. But that frame blurred quickly. It didn't feel like the version of me from tonight. I placed the ticket neatly back in the card, then pulled it out again, smoothed the edges, slipped it into my wallet in the zippered pocket, then reopened it, weighing the choice. I named this feeling not pride, not a right to ask for more, but a chance to make things less fractured. I had spoken too harshly. They had too, but maybe a lottery ticket could be an olive branch. I opened the card again, wrote one more line. If luck smiles on us, I want to smile with you. I pictured the way I'd walk tomorrow, not timid, not defiant. I'd arrive on time, place the card on the plate and say, I bought this for Dad for luck. Dad would squint. Stealing my system now, huh? And everyone would laugh. I could handle Emily talking about her road trip in the new car. I wouldn't compare it to my $25 envelope. Tonight, that was just a thin object. I poured the tea, touched the rim of the cup to my lips, and understood that I was choosing family first, then myself. I knew money couldn't fix everything, but sometimes gratitude needs a bridge to cross, and maybe this ticket was a temporary one. I kept the wallet close, turned off. Most of the light sat on the floor for a long while, waiting for my heartbeat to steady. My phone lit up with a message in the family group chat, 11 a.m. tomorrow, fridge cleanup. I typed, sure, then erased it, then typed, I'll come. Before bed, I opened the wallet one more time to check, zipped it shut, the soft hiss sounding like a pencil line drawn across paper. I mapped it out in my head. If it had to be claimed publicly, I'd say, split 3 ways the roof. Emily's wedding and my tuition. If I could claim it quietly, I'd ask to set up a family fund under Dad's name so he'd feel in charge. The rest, I'd ask Mum for a corner of it. Studio hours, classes, a few essential tools. I smiled to myself at the thought of someone's eyes softening at the feeling of being chosen. I didn't yet know that real life rarely follows neat plans. But tonight, I fell asleep with one clear decision. Tomorrow morning, I would bring the ticket home to share. And if I had to stand at the edge of the photo, at least this time, I'd be the one holding the camera, framing the whole room in the shot. The next morning, I slipped the card into my coat pocket, kept the wallet closed, the ticket lay quietly inside, like a secret, willing to behave. The air was still damp with mist. I walked to the house telling myself today, I share to begin again. Fridge clean-up lunch meant all the leftovers from the night before were back on the table. Cold-cut salad, reheated bread. The smell of coffee drifted down the hallway. Helen placed the best portion in front of Emily, out of habit, no thought needed. Richard talked about the BMW test drive schedule, his voice booming with enthusiasm, no mic required. I rolled up my sleeves, gathered napkins loaded, the dishwasher replaced the worn-out stove mat. Doing not speaking. Aunt Martha arrived a few minutes late, breathless from the cold. She saw me first, gently touched my arm under the edge of the table. "How's your new year going?" she asked, just soft enough for only me to hear. "I just got pre-approved to rent a studio slot by the hour," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The grant deadline's Wednesday. If I get it, I can cut one night shift to work on the new series. My professor also asked me to assist a weekend workshop for some kids." She smiled, her gaze warm like a desk lamp. "I saw your graphite series on IG, stunning work." "Thank you," I said, hearing my voice ease by half a degree. She turned to Helen. "Did you see her post? The city bridge, gorgeous light." Later," Helen replied with a polite smile, then immediately asked Emily about the test drive schedule. Richard chimed in with insurance packages and service plans. Emily talked about a New Year's resort by the sea. Their laughter flowed past me like a river past a stone. I got up, tightened the leaky faucet, arranged the dishes neatly on the rack. Aunt Martha watched me, nodded slightly as if offering a small umbrella. I waited until dessert was near. The plan was to bring out the card just before someone picked up the knife to cut the cake so we could all laugh together. I went upstairs to slip the ticket into the card, a small olive branch just as I'd imagined last night. The hallway was empty. The bathroom door was ajar with a strip of light. I opened the card, placed the ticket inside, then paused for a second because the word luck suddenly looked too large for the rest of this house. The soft hum of the dishwasher slipped in through the old vent that led from the kitchen upstairs. The sound was slightly distorted, but the voices were clear enough to recognize. Richard. "She's always dreaming. Not realistic. Helen. I worry she can't handle money. Help her and she gets dependent." Emily, a small laugh. "She's better off serving very meticulous. Richard like hammering in a nail. Without us, where would she be? We saved her." Helen closed it. "As for Emily's stuff, we'll make it work like always." I stood still, card open in my hands. The phrase, "make it work," struck my ear like a faint bell. I'd heard it before long ago somewhere on a stairwell landing. I told myself they're probably talking about money. Adults have their grown-up expenses. I inhaled, trying to file everything into a safe compartment, but the line "we saved her" lodged itself in the center of my chest like a stone. Suddenly, the way I was holding the card drooped. I folded it shut, slid the ticket out, tucked it back into the zippered pocket of my wallet. The card still kept the apology inside. I told myself clearly, share, but only with the right people at the right time. Right now, I wasn't mending anything. I was erasing myself. Back in the kitchen, I opened the dishwasher. The warm steam hit my face. I rinsed the dishes as if nothing had happened. Aunt Martha stood beside me, handed me a dry towel. She didn't ask, just handed it over, and I was grateful for that. When everyone moved on to fruit, Richard raised a small glass, not loudly, but loud enough for all to hear. "Family is where we learn to be grateful." He smiled modestly, like sealing a line he'd said many times and still believed. I touched the wallet at my hip, feeling the slight pressure of the zipper through the fabric. On the countertop, the light reflected into a narrow straight line like the edge of a bridge. I told myself I'll hold on to this bridge until I'm certain where it leads. As I left the house, I thanked them for lunch, a final courtesy for the day. Outside, cold wind bit at my wrists. I pulled my sleeves down, caught my reflection for a second, in the window of a car parked by the curb. The figure was blurry, but the posture was upright. I walked back to my rented room, counting steps to the rhythm of a heart slowly calming. On the way, my phone buzzed. Emily had sent a photo of the cake with the caption, "Family is where everything is." I typed, "looks nice," then put the phone away. In my room, I placed the wallet on the desk, opened it, and looked at the ticket resting quietly like a thin leaf. I didn't scratch, nor didn't calculate imaginary money. I just wrote 3 lines on a small piece of paper: lawyer, financial advisor, hourly studio. Then I stuck the note to the edge of the mirror, turned off the kitchen light, and left the warm desk lamp glowing like an eye-keeping watch over sleep. Night came slowly. I heard the footsteps of neighbours passing the heater, clicking on and off the city, breathing gently. In my mind, lunch had condensed into a few sharp words, dreamer. Can't manage money. Saved her. I didn't cry. I didn't feel stronger than anyone else either. I just knew that tomorrow I would start from those 3 lines on the paper and from one quiet decision to hold off on giving the ticket to people who haven't yet seen me when I have nothing to give. The next morning I taped a small note to the mirror. Read the terms. Don't sign yet, lawyer. Store the ticket safely. No big purchases. Tell no one. I stood there staring at the words, like they were a rope stretched across the new current of my life. My heart was still pounding. I had never seen a number that large outside a movie screen. Not even in my most outrageous dreams had I ever touched anything like it. So, where to begin? How do you claim the money correctly? Who can guide me without taking advantage? Who should I tell? First, my aunt, my closest friend, or no one at all. If I share now, where will the money go? Will any part of it remain mine for independence? What is the 1-year goal? Study draw? Sleep enough? Or simply learn how to breathe normally when everything around me is anything but? I opened my wallet, took the ticket out, then tucked it back in the zipper, making a soft hiss. Instinctively, I almost signed the back for peace of mind, but a claim guide on the lottery site popped into my head. Always consult a lawyer before signing. I set the pen down. The first lesson of growing up, don't make anything permanent while your hands are still shaking. A few minutes later, I thought I'd lost the ticket, searched everywhere only to find it wedged inside my sketchbook. That sinking feeling in my stomach lasted exactly 5 seconds, just long enough for me to decide. This afternoon, I'll register for a safety deposit box at the bank. At noon, I went to my school's legal clinic for an overview consultation, then chose an independent attorney. He advised setting up the Maple Street Trust, opening a PO box, creating a dedicated email and phone number used only for this. We covered the claims process, the timeline, and the state's anonymity options. We broke the funds down into 3 tiers and 5 prohibitions. Tier 1, safety taxes, fees a 12-month emergency fund and insurance. Tier 2, education infrastructure, paying tuition hourly. Studio rental modest laptop upgrades, advanced courses guided by the rule increase quality, not appearance. The final tier, the future long-term retirement investment, and a personal reserve I named the Artistic Freedom Fund to cut night shifts without dropping out. The 5 prohibitions: no debt, co-signing, no lending to family, only anonymous third-party aid, no spending to buy affection, and all major expenses go through an advisor. After writing it all out, I felt a quiet steadiness reassemble my spine. That evening, I signed the hourly studio contract, bought quality graphite pencils and exhibition-grade paper, and saved the receipts. I submitted my grant application before the deadline. The ding of the confirmation email felt like life giving a small nod. I still took on shifts, but selectively turning down nights that clashed with drawing or class. I went to bed an hour earlier. These small changes felt like rearranging furniture in a cramped room no one outside would notice, but I could breathe easier. Sometimes I ask myself the question people always ask when they hear about lottery winners. With that much money, what would you even keep doing? I answered myself slowly and clearly. Money doesn't give me purpose. It only buys me time to chase the purpose I already had. I don't draw to pay rent, I draw because it's the only way I understand the world and myself. If I dropped school, dropped art, I'd just be trading one cramped room for a larger one that still felt empty inside. I don't want a quiet life because I've turned everything off. I want a steady life because I've learned which switches I need to turn on. Money is only the power source. The rest is the machine I have to build myself. I texted Mum, "I'll be busy with an advanced class this weekend, so I'll miss dinner. I'll let you know when I'm free." Polite, brief, no explanations. I called Aunt Martha to thank her for listening at lunch, stopping just short of what I really wanted to say. I wasn't ready to test the tightness of any lips, yet even kind ones. In my notebook, I wrote one line of commitment we'll share once everything is in place. Prioritize family needs through anonymous giving. I didn't need anyone to praise me for being grateful. I needed to learn how to respect myself first. Only then could I truly respect others. A message popped up in the family group chat. "Friday night, is everyone free? We've got news." Emily posted a photo of her hand with a ring cropped just enough to let the gold gleam. Below, Richard wrote about a big plan. I tapped a heart emoji, closed my laptop, and took a long breath. I rested my forehead against the window pane for a second. Outside, the city kept moving just like any other ordinary day. The announcement happened at home, cake roses, red sweaters, the click of cameras. Bradley was polite, just awkward enough. Helen stroked Emily's hair, saying, "You deserve the best," as if the sentence had been pre-stitched into a handkerchief. Richard raised his glass. "Next year, everything will fall into place." I stood by the window, taking phones from people to snap photos for them. I stepped back by myself, framed the shot for the three of them in the centre. After the cake was cut, papers were spread across the dining table like a mini conference. The country club venue shone bright in the first checkbox. Flowers, band photographer, dress party favours. Bradley said gently, "Maybe we could trim a few things." Emily looked at him, her smile stopping halfway. "This night only happens once." Helen closed it. "Her parents will take care of it." Richard tapped his pen. "Assets exist to serve the family." I sat quietly as they moved from item to item, like watching people choose furniture for a room I'd never had the key to. The phrase, "make it work," came up several times, calmly like a comma. Toward the end, Richard mentioned a very good offer for the multi-generational house. Helen nodded, eyes shining. Selling it would ease the debt and fulfill Emily's plans. The whole table exhaled as if clearing a boulder from the road. I felt something shut quietly inside my chest, definite but not loud. Helen turned to me, her voice soft to the point of not touching skin. "If you could contribute a little to her big day?" I set my glass down, kept my tone even. "I'm covering tuition and an hourly studio. I won't be contributing financially. But I'll design the invitations, the signage, the wedding website. That part I can do well." Helen paused for half a beat, then nodded as if accepting an old fact. Emily didn't say thank you, just kept scrolling through flower options on her phone. The next afternoon, I stopped by the house after the movers had left. The walls still showed marks where photos had hung, and the floor bore the outlines of old table legs like traces of sunlight that had gone out. I opened the attic cabinet and found the second-grade certificate edges yellowed, but the words "drawing award" still clear. I ran my hand across the cover, wrapped it in newspaper, and packed it with a few photo albums. The backyard was bare, with only the rusted frame of the old swing chair left behind. The grass showed tyre tracks from where the moving truck had backed in. If a house could be sold for the price of a wedding, then maybe it was never meant to hold people-only things. Back in my room, I opened my planner and broke the wedding design work into small milestones, mood board fonts, palette test prints. Help with skill, not money, I reminded myself like a steady breath. I reviewed the financial principles I'd written: safety, educational foundation, future. No co-signing, no lending anonymous support when needed. Holding the ticket means holding the power to choose not to close doors. I would still share, but in the right time, the right way, with the right people. The engagement party invitations to the country club were sent that week. Thick paper, fresh ink scent, lettering full of flourish. Helen messaged me privately. "Your father is working on his speech." I stood in front of the mirror trying on a simple dress, fastening the buttons, looking at myself in the narrow frame. That day, I'd walk in, upright, speak little, look directly. If I had to stand on the edge, I'd still stand tall. And if anyone asked where I was in the photo, I'd point to my hands holding the frame for the whole room. The night before the party, I stepped out onto the balcony, the city flowing beneath me like a steady ribbon of light. In my wallet, the zipper nudged my hip like a small reminder my bridge is still there. On the other side of that bridge, I don't know what's waiting. But right here on this side, I know I'm not buying a ticket to the centre of the picture. I'm just keeping my spine straight while others turn the lens. The country club shone like a block of crystal set in the middle of a field of grass. Golden lights poured down over round tables, draped in white cloth champagne glasses, lined up like bells yet to ring. I arrived on time in a simple dress, standing at the edge of the room, doing the familiar work. The band played a standard piece, the drum beats landing on thick carpet like footsteps in snow. When it was time for the toast, the MC introduced a long-time friend of my father. He took the mic, smiling, harmlessly. Congratulations to the happy couple. 2 wonderful daughters. The room applauded, the clapping rippling like wind through leaves. Richard, his cheeks flushed from wine, took the mic. He gave a stiff smile, adjusted his collar, and said a sentence so calm it was cruel. I only have one biological daughter, Emily. The mic let out a faint screech. The whole room froze for half a second. Cameras dropped from people's faces. I heard the fizz of champagne die the moment it touched glass. Helen spun around like an actress saving a scene. He's joking. That's the champagne talking. But Richard had already opened a door that would not close easily. He added one more blow voice, trying to stay noble. Claire. We took her in when she was little. Family is about gratitude. We tried. The music swelled too fast to drown the moment. Helen pulled the mic down. The MC tossed out a weak joke. Waitstaff pushed trays of cake through like rescue boats. But the sentence had hit the floor and everyone stepped around it. I didn't. I stood still, feeling like someone had swapped the places of breath and heart inside my chest. I stepped back toward the edge of the hall. Helen caught up in the hallway, her voice low. We meant to tell you when you turned 18. Then it kept getting put off. Richard followed one button undone. We took you in when you were small. We tried to love equally. I asked, not raising my voice. When were you planning to tell me? He looked down at his shoes, shiny as mirrors, when you were ready. I laughed very quietly. I've been ready for a long time. No one ever asked. A familiar sound pulled me back in time. Not music, but the quiet hum of a dishwasher through a vent. This time, the sentence came through whole. Back then, the doctor said, the chances of having a biological child were very low. We took Claire to fill the gap. Then Emily was born. And from that point, everything changed. Gap called itself by name. I saw the broken-legged doll, the second-grade certificate that lit up for one night, then dimmed the half-step back I took in every photo. All of it slid back into place, like someone had turned the frame the right way around. Inside the ballroom, the murmuring began. She's adopted, poor thing. Now, the house sale makes sense. Bradley's mother pulled Helen aside, subtly asking about family history. Helen tilted her face into a composed smile, tears gathered neatly at the outer corners of her eyes. Emily stood near the stage, her smile held only half her face. The other half glanced toward the groom's side guests as if trying to draw the curtain closed. I walked down the hallway that led to the balcony. The night air was cold and clean like a blank sheet of paper. On the dark golf course, a few car headlights drifted by like glowing insects. The glass door closed behind me, leaving just a thin layer of music. I placed my hand on the stone railing fingers, so cold I could hear the click in my bones. I tried to name what I felt, but it slipped like a bead rolling across the floor, pain, relief, shame, clarity all at once. Behind me, The steady rhythm of Emily's heels tapped across the tiled floor. She stopped at the doorway, her voice flat. "They told you." I turned around. On stage, a very slow blink passed across her eyes. "I've wanted them to say it for a long time," Emily said, like setting down something light on a table. "Not like this," I replied, "but maybe there's never a good time for a sentence like that." Emily looked toward the banquet hall. "Tonight is my night." I nodded, and that was a sentence that belonged to me. Richard appeared at the far end of the hallway, his tie off-centre by an inch, his steps slightly heavy. He stopped a few paces away from us, like getting any closer might break something fragile. "Dad?" Emily called, her voice uncertain. Richard looked at me, eyes suddenly clearer than they'd been all evening, as if the alcohol had just been drained from his veins. "I shouldn't have..." He began, then stopped. I didn't help him finish. I simply asked, "What's the definition of fairness in our family, Dad?" He exhaled, fingers tightening at the edge of his pocket. "Family is about gratitude." I raised my head. I have been grateful with my silence, with stepping out of the frame. But gratitude doesn't mean disappearing. He reached a hand out like he meant to touch my shoulder, then pulled it back. We tried. "I believe you," I said, "but I paid for that trying with a part of my life." The glass door opened wind, pulling a ribbon of music out before it cut off. Someone was calling Emily in to pose for the cake-cutting photo. She hesitated a second, then turned away. Richard remained arms slack at his sides, the face of a man who had just spilled wine on an expensive rug, unsure where to begin cleaning. I didn't teach him how. I just looked up at the night sky and saw a star fall slowly at the edge of my vision. I don't know where the story goes after tonight, but I know what part is mine to stop begging for a place in someone else's photo and to hold my spine straight in the frame of my own. I pulled the glass door open again, letting the noise and light burst into view. Across the room, the microphone lay quiet on the podium, like a knife that had just been used. I walked past it without touching it. I drove to the riverside after leaving the parking lot. The night air was cool and hollow, like a room just cleaned out. I sat on a stone bench, breathing deeply until my heartbeat settled. Then I messaged the family group tomorrow 10 a.m. Willow Cafe back table. "Say it clearly. No interruptions. I won't speak at home." Helen replied first. "Stay calm, don't do anything rash. Let the celebration be over." Richard added, "Tomorrow we'll talk." I simply sent back, "I'm fine. See you tomorrow." Willow Cafe was softly lit. I chose a round table, set out 3 glasses of water. Richard and Helen arrived on time. Emily, a few minutes later. I opened simply. Last night was public. Today is formal. Ground rule speak from I, no gratitude lectures. No one objected. I asked the questions I needed to know. Timing and origin. "When did you take me in, and what do you know about my birth family?" Richard spoke quietly. "When you were nearly a newborn. The records are at home." I nodded, breathing evenly. "Why didn't you tell me when I turned 18? Helen looked at me, eyes red. "We were afraid you'd leave, afraid everything would break in front of the relatives. Then we kept postponing it." I looked briefly at Emily. Then back. I understand fear. But silence hurt me more. I didn't raise my voice. Last night, one line stuck with me. "We saved her." I don't need saving. I need you to name what happened. I was kept out of the frame for many years. Richard swallowed hard. Was biased. "I'm sorry," Helen said slowly. So was I. I listened without interrupting, letting those 3 words, "I'm sorry," rest quietly on the table. Then I set boundaries clearly and briefly. From now on, no belittling, no comparisons. Don't weaponize gratitude to shut me down. For the wedding and the condo, I won't contribute financially. I'll support with my work invitations, signage, wedding site. Any financial matters, if any, go via email. No discussions with alcohol. Richard nodded this time without resistance. Emily pressed her lips together, then said softly, "Thank you for the design help." I replied, "Congratulations on your engagement." Lastly, I said the most important thing. I need full copies of my adoption documents' agency name, accompanying papers, medical history if any. Within 2 weeks, I'll start with paperwork things I can hold, things that can be named. Helen nodded, "I'll look for them." Richard added, "I'll send a confirmation email tonight." He looked at me, voice notably lowered. "Can I ask something?" I gave him space. "What do you need from me now?" I answered slowly. Directly, respect. And silence in the right moments. When you're not sure what to say, please say nothing. He raised a hand as if to touch my shoulder, then pulled it back. "Okay," he said. "I'll learn." We sat in stillness for a moment. The espresso machine behind the counter let out a soft puff of steam. "I wrapped up the meeting. I'll send a document request via email. Schedule it 2 weeks in advance." I stood first polite as when I'd arrived. At the door, I turned back and said one final sentence, like placing a nail into the floor. "I'm not asking for a spot in the old photo. I'm just standing straight in the frame that's mine." No one replied, but the air felt lighter. Outside, the late sun peeked through a patch of clouds, thin as thread. I opened my phone, typed 3 lines into an email draft records agency medical history. That's it. The rest could wait. I put my phone away and walked steadily, like someone relearning how to move forward on their own 2 feet. That afternoon, my inbox gave a soft buzz. Richard had sent a short email, the tone carefully formal. Attached are scans of the documents. The hard copies will follow. I opened each file, blurred purple stamps in the corners, the agency's name, the date of placement. A few lines marked identity withheld. On the edge of one page, a handwritten note from a staff member, "Long ago, healthy baby, sleeps well." The rounded letters stood still on the screen like a solid ground beneath my feet. I filled out the centre's inquiry form as instructed. In the notes section, I chose initial contact by letter and typed 4 words respecting privacy boundaries. After sending, I sat still for a while, listening to the refrigerator hum, softly like someone quietly keeping rhythm for the room. 2 days later, a reply arrived. The centre informed me that my birth mother had left her contact option open. They included a letter from Margaret Collins, ivory paper, slightly slanted handwriting. I read slowly, as if afraid to tear the sound of the words. "I was 19 when I had you. I was a sophomore in college and I had no way to give you a decent start. I chose adoption because it felt like the kindest thing I could do. Not a year has passed when I forgot your birthday. I now teach art at a public school. I have 2 more children. They know about you. If you want, I'm ready to meet at your pace." I set the letter down, both hands open like I'd just received a warm bowl. Not forgotten, expected. I wrote back a concise reply. "Thank you, respect for boundaries. A suggestion to meet in a neutral spot. A quiet cafe near the museum for 1 hour, no guests." I listed 3 things I wanted to know why that year. Was there pressure? What had she kept of mine? And 3 things I wanted to preserve: slow steps, honest words. No one replaces anyone. On the day of the meeting, I arrived 10 minutes early. The cafe had large glass windows facing the trees, and the sound of a spoon against a cup rang like a soft knock on a lid, just enough to wake you. Margaret walked in, right on time, holding a fabric tote. She had the hands of someone who makes art, faint stains near the knuckles, nails cut short. When she sat down, I noticed something small. We shared the curved bridge of our cheekbones. "Thank you for coming," I said first. "Thank you for writing," she replied, her voice low and steady. We began with the past. No embellishments, no sugarcoating. Back then, she said I lived in a dorm, worked part-time at the library. Your grandparents were kind, but strict. No one scolded me. Everything was just tighter than I could handle. I asked if anyone had pressured her. She shook her head. No, I was counselled. I made the choice. I believed you deserved a more stable home. I asked why she left the contact option open. I didn't know if you'd ever want to find me, but I wanted you to know my door was never locked. She didn't cry, neither did I. We sat upright, letting the sound of the coffee grinder fill the pauses. And now, how is her life? She teaches art at a public school, spends her off hours in a small studio behind the house, fires ceramics on weekends. Her 2 other children, Thomas and Elaine, one's a photographer, the other makes pottery. They've always known about you. She said they call you their sister in the city. I smiled for the first time that day. I am the sister in the city. We didn't hug right away. After about 60 minutes, when the server brought more water, Margaret reached out her hand. Her hand was warm. The smooth calluses of someone who's held brushes for years touched the tips of my fingers like a quiet greeting. I showed her an A4 graphite print, a bridge over the canal near where I run. I drew the bridge when I needed to remember there's always something on the other side, I said. She opened her bag and took out a thick envelope. A blurry ultrasound image, a copy of my birth weight certificate, and a hand-drawn birthday card. For each year, the first 18, with no one to send them to. I kept drawing them for you every year, she said a little shyly, like someone confessing a good habit. We agreed on how to go forward. Letters and photos first, then video calls if that went well, and finally meeting her small family next. I chose a slow rhythm, like learning a new melody. She nodded, letting me set the pace. We can build a small bridge, she said, laying 1 plank at a time. As I stood up, I realised my chest felt lighter than when I'd arrived. Not because I had gained another family, but because everything had begun to be called by its right name. On the way home, I opened my notebook and drew 3 columns. New things I know Margaret chose, not pressured. Always remembered my birthday. Still, unknown maternal, side medical history. Things to do, keep writing letters, prepare a few questions for next time, keep drawing. I stuck a small note to the corner of my mirror, go slow to go far. That night, I placed her first birthday card next to the paper, labelled 3 tiers and 5 rules. Beside the numbers, there was now something soft, a human milestone money couldn't buy. I made tea, left the pot on the table so the room could carry the warmth of something awaited. My phone lit up an email from Richard. I've sent a request to the centre for the hard copy. I'll deliver it once it arrives. I replied briefly, thanks, please send it to the P.O. Box address as agreed. Setting the phone down, I listened to the light tapping of rain on the awning. In my mind, my graphite bridge appeared again, each plank, a choice, a boundary, a truth. I don't need a seat in someone else's house. I'm opening the windows in my own room to see both sides. Some things we don't choose but are still ours. Some things we must choose for them to become ours. Tonight, I know both. That morning, Richard called. His voice was hoarse and curt. His work had been going downhill lately. My sister's wedding costs had ballooned, the money from the house sale was nearly gone, and Emily's condo deposit was coming due. He asked if I could lend a small amount just for a few months. He didn't know I had money. The reason he turned to me came from a string of past moments back in early January, when the local paper ran a piece about a $5 million lottery ticket sold at the gas station near my place. He'd called and said, check if you happen to buy something. A few weeks later, when the prize was claimed by an anonymous trust, he and Helen had commented, whoever won is so selfish not to come forward. Since then, they'd had vague suspicions. But today, he was calling because he was desperate, probably out of people to ask. They only remembered me when something went wrong. I suddenly understood my role was always to put out fires, while the fireworks were saved for the biological daughter. I let the silence stretch for a few beats, keeping my breathing even. then said slowly, I wasn't given money, I was given a $25 gift card for Christmas. If you need, I can send that. I hung up and sat with my back straight. Two opposite currents passed through me. I didn't want to enable their dependency, but I also didn't want to see them sink. When both currents quieted, the clearest thought left was, if I help, it will be anonymously one time only, so we don't bind ourselves further. I asked a third-party fund to transfer an amount sufficient to get them through the crisis without my name. The act landed quietly, like setting a stone down into a riverbed. That afternoon, Richard messaged the family group, "A miracle just came through the company's stable for now." I replied, "Glad you've worked it out." That was all. Helen invited me over to celebrate. I politely declined. I've got studio hours tonight. I included the latest draft of the wedding invitation and signage and confirmed the print schedule. I would help with my skill, not with my money. That night, Emily called privately. Her voice was soft. "The printing costs are higher than expected. Can you chip in a little?" I spoke slowly, letting each word stand firm. "I won't contribute money. I can help you negotiate the price." I called the print shop trimmed. The fluff changed the paper type and consolidated colours to save cost. The budget dropped a notch. Emily paused for a few seconds, then said, "Thank you." I replied, "It's nothing," and I meant it. That night, I opened my laptop and drafted a plan for a small fund scholarships for art students in need money for Pencil's paper studio hours. No announcements needed. I wanted my luck to land in the hands of those who needed a foothold, not on bar tables traded as tales of glory. I typed one line to close the intent, give so others can keep learning not to collect credit. My phone buzzed. Richard again. I let the ringtone pass 3 times, then messaged back. "I don't discuss money over the phone. If it's about the wedding or design work, please email." A few minutes later, he replied with a thumbs-up emoji. I realised for the first time my new boundary hadn't been pushed back. I called Margaret for 5 minutes. I kept it short. My adoptive family was in a tight spot. I'd helped with a quiet contribution. She listened silently, then said, "You did what you needed to do. But from now on, let them recognise you more." I smiled. I'm learning. A year later, my old family now lives in a lakeside apartment. Richard's company has climbed out of the dip, their spending more measured. Emily's wedding photos hang polished on every wall. Between us lies polite distance email when needed, no money calls. I send gifts at appropriate times. They respond with just the right words. No more gratitude lessons, no silent expectations. My new family is built on letters. Margaret and I have met a few times, going slow as if teaching ourselves a new melody. Thomas and Elaine occasionally send photos of work for feedback. Around me are Aunt Martha, my studio teachers, 2 fellow artists, people who stayed. I switch on my desk lamp and write, "This Christmas, invite them to my place." In my small apartment, I've pushed together 2 tables, draped them white simmering soup on the stove, cinnamon-scented warmth from the oven. A playlist whispers steady breath after a long road. At lunchtime, I send a small-scale graphite print to Richard and Helen's apartment via the front desk, with a card that reads only "wishing peace." Moments later, Helen replies, "Thank you, very beautiful, that's enough." My inbox taps lightly. The Student Affairs Office confirms my scholarship is finalised spring cohort. I pack 2 pilot art kits, pencils, paper, studio access cards, placing them by the door. Money doesn't need applause. It just needs to reach the right address. Guests arrive as dusk falls. Coats hang in a colourful row near the door. Aunt Martha hugs me, admires the print in the living room, says it catches light just right. My teacher crouches to lift a tray from the oven, smiles as I use an X-Acto to trim parchment paper. The artists sit, cross-legged, flipping through a sketchbook like a cherished album. The room smells of cake and paint like a small studio with its light on. Margaret arrives last, carrying a steaming apple pie. We exchange a warm embrace long enough to settle. She stands beside me at the counter, sprinkling more cinnamon. No words needed. The space between our hands closes itself. Once everyone's settled, I raise my glass. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. Each guest receives a postcard printed with the bridge, the back inscribed with slanted text, "Go slow to go far." My teacher nods as if checking it off his notebook. Aunt Martha tucks the card into her wallet, saying she'll place it on her desk in the morning. Margaret and I pin one of those old birthday cards on the planning board, right next to the scholarship deadline. 1, anchor, human 1 anchor number, and me in the hinge that fits both. I slip into the study for a moment and write a letter to my 8-year-old self. You don't need to step back to fit the frame. Frames can change. Just keep drawing. That's how you pass through every season. I place it beside my 2nd grade certificate like a hand landing on a shoulder of the past. Back at the table, conversation shifts to paper textures for the upcoming exhibition. I ladle more soup, pour more tea. I no longer need to squeeze into the centre or linger on the margin. I'm exactly where I belong. Before anyone leaves, I set the camera on the shelf, use a 10-second timer. Everyone clusters close. Margaret wreathes left Aunt Martha, right teacher, slightly bent and too tall for the frame. I step into the middle, not because anyone pulled me, but because that's who I am. The light flashes. Click. On the screen, a clear photo of 6 people, no one stepping back. After guests leave the house, quiet. On the table remained the bridge postcard, the old birthday card, the scholarship checklist. I sit beneath the soft lamplight, thinking of what I wish to send into the world. That family is those who call you by your true name, no quid pro quo. That kindness can live alongside boundaries. That frames can change. I shut off the lights. The camera still hums softly, even unused. I already hold the memory. This time I stand squarely in the centre, not to prove anything, just because it's my frame.